Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm calling to order. Approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Of the, approved with unanimously. Okay, do we have a report from the executive session which the secretary will make?
Yes, ma'am. The following items were discussed in closed session that I can report on. The Pat Holloway federal action lawsuit was discussed. The Warren Mitchell lawsuit was discussed. And the concept of recreational immunity regarding the park that is part of the Clackamas River Water District was also discussed. The last item is Carver Bridge update. I was not in the room for that, so I'll refer to the chair.
It was discussed. The Carver Bridge, continuation of the Carver Bridge discussion was discussed. Okay, there is no public here, so I doubt there'll be any public comment. So we'll go straight into action items. And the first action item is the change order approval and project acceptance, Highway 212 water line repair, CIP 14-5067. And Joe is going to report.
I would move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Approval? Okay.
I believe it's Highway 213, not Highway
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Well, I'm pleased to be here for the acceptance of the project. Less pleased for the cost overrun. And what I provided in the packet included a description of the overrun, two change orders, and the acceptance document, which the board president will sign tonight, along with the two change orders. The first change order includes all of the construction changes, primarily from pavement increases. We had to grind the travel lane, not just the bike lane, within the project zone, and that increased the quantities until we got an invoice for the overrun. Significant in the price of the project. So I want to come to the board and I'll need to ask questions.
Any questions? Go ahead, Mary.
I've read this change order thing over several times, and I guess I don't really see anything in there that warrants additional money for this project.
Okay, which, any of the three items in the
These
first
are all
item?
things that should have been foreseen before the contract was let.
So if I may, Commissioner.
Yes.
So I think one of the challenges is when the contract was let, the idea was that we were only going to be impacting the bike lane with the project. But as part of the project, we discovered a couple things. One, Joe, you need to help me out here, but the pipe that was previously unidentified that wasn't part of the plans that did, plus it coupled with some earlier leak work that did impact the travel lane. And so unfortunately, once you start cutting into the travel lane, then that's when they ask you to do that additional paving.
Whole way.
And you get kind of stuck on that. So the original project, we weren't going to touch the travel lane, but unfortunately, because of those two conditions, that ended up impacting the travel lane, which then forces you into repaving the whole travel lane, which is the whole reason for the additional paving.
When I was with the county commission, the project began going over budget, and so we as a commission decided that we wouldn't approve any more change orders, and that's my position.
Is there, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Was there any way you could have anticipated this any part of these cost overruns, or were they truly an unanticipated circumstance?
We could have included the quantity for that travel lane paving and grinding. It would have increased the project cost up front rather than as a change order. So we wouldn't have got away scot-free without the costs that are associated with this increase in paving. There are two things that increase the paving cost. Todd alluded to one, which is the leak that occurred a couple of weeks prior to start of construction. So we already had a contract in place, and we're waiting for the start date for the contract to start. A leak occurred, our crews went in and repaired that leak. The existing main was right at the white bike lane. And so when they went in and covered a large area of the main, that's the intrusion into the travel lane, greater than we anticipated. That all required full depth 10 inches of asphalt. So we had to repair all of that. When our crews left, they just used a cold patch, a couple inches thick, to maintain the gravel. That coupled with 3 other intrusions, one for the tie-in and 2 for services. When the ODOT inspector got there, he said, I hate to do this to you, but I need you to go ahead and grind and pave the travel for the 100 feet that the project disturbed. So that quantity was also added. So we had the full depth of the repair plus the 2 inches of the grind inlay, and that's why the number got lower. Had we anticipated it, those costs would have been in the contract up front, and the overall project cost would have been higher than what it was at the bid time.
So for all intents and purposes, whether you had anticipated it or not, it still was going to cost the same amount of money?
Roughly.
Okay.
The other 2, the first one has to do with we're lacking records on how that pipe was installed initially. There were no as-bills for it. So when we dug down the pipe, we found a piece of pipe sticking out of the valve we wanted to connect to that was out of alignment from where we were going. So the contractor had to spend a couple hours with his crew to gingerly uncover it and remove it and bolt from the valve. So he lost a couple hours of work time, and it was appropriate to pay him for that labor. Number 2 is a deduct. Initially, we intended to bore across the highway and reinstall new copper services. We erroneously thought they were plastic. What we found when we potholed were copper service lines. So we made a decision in the field to couple at the trench line rather than bore across the highway. So we received a reduction in the price for the boring under the highway, some pothole work that would have uncovered utilities. So we needed a pothole before we did that work. So we got a deduct on it.
Thank you.
So did they charge us the same amount that they did for the paving, for the additional paving? So quantity?
They provided invoices from their paver, and we paid what they paid.
Because there's a bid item for paving restoration.
By the lineal foot.
Yeah.
So we had a scope assigned to the contract. This is.
That was the width of the bike lane, right? Not the width of the travel lane?
Correct.
Okay. And so I was just wondering if they'd honored their bid price, you know, the quantity.
Well, that lineal foot price included the trench full depth 10 inches of asphalt also, as well as the T-cut, which is the grind.
So who's gonna do the striping replacement?
ODOT is
That's
going
good.
to
I
do
was
that.
hoping that was gonna, because they haven't striped the highway yet, so.
Right. He's scheduling that. The second change order is a documentation of final contract amount with regard to the bid items. There were a couple of small increases amounting to $383. This is a final sets the final contract amount. We received before, when there aren't any other change orders, it generally comes through. And then the last document, of course, is the notice of acceptance. With that, we can make final payment and release the retainer.
I have no more questions.
So I don't understand change order number 2.
Okay.
What's the $383 fix?
This was a unit price bid, so there were some small adjustments in 2 bid items. One was the overall length of the paving, and the other one was in the poundage of the fittings used.
So you increased the poundage of the fittings used?
Yeah, over 5 pounds.
Yeah.
So when we receive a bid, once we receive a bid, we have a contractor on board, they provide submittals to us. And we use those submittals to document the actual, in this case, the pounds of fittings. So we go to their submittals, we say, okay, this fitting, T or whatever, weighs this much, and we pay them $3 a pound for that. So we count all those fittings up individually, sum the poundage of the fittings, and then that goes in, that's the bid item, for pounds per fitting. We do it that way so that we have some flexibility to either subtract or reduce fittings based on field conditions if you have to adjust your water line or find something in the ground that is not anticipated. Size of existing pipe, you have to go around a manhole that's buried and you didn't know it was there. There's all kinds of, it's just kind of a standard way of being able to have field flexibility without having to negotiate a change order prior to making the change. You simply adjust the bid item value or quantity. You don't have to have a change order.
Are there any other questions? Okay, in that case, we'll have a vote. All those in favor of the action item, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say no.
No?
Oh,
It passes 3-2. Thank you. Okay, the consent agenda, what I'd like to do, just in case there's any questions at all about item 3 in the consent agenda, I'd like somebody to have a motion for the consent agenda 1 and 2.
So moved.
Second? Okay, all in favor?
Make sure there's no questions.
Oh, are there any questions? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So I just thought we would separate it out. Approval of purchase of hydrant service truck. Is there any information on that, or do we want to just go ahead and approve it?
We're available to answer any questions. You have the information in your packets. It's something that we do have funds in the budget to do this.
Okay.
It exceeds the general manager's authority, which is why it's coming before you.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the purchase of the hydrant service truck?
I'll move to approve the purchase of the hydrant service truck.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, we're gonna have some discussion.
Okay, yes. Please,
Okay.
please do. I thought I had asked, but go ahead.
Look, doesn't
Okay.
usually follow the motion and then we have discussion and
Yes,
then we vote.
that's
Okay.
true. Okay,
Just
sorry
want to make
about
sure we
that.
got this figured out.
Okay.
So Carol, I believe this was in the budget, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that.
Okay,
I'm
great.
good.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, 4 ayes and 1 abstention.
You can't abstain without cause. You have to determine, anybody who abstains has to determine or publicly state why. So it's either 5-0 or 4-1 or a public
Larry,
statement.
do you say aye on the hydrant truck?
Did you vote for or against the hydrant truck? Did you vote for or against the hydrant truck?
I abstain.
I believe we're required to state the reason why we abstain.
Pardon?
I believe we're required to state the reason why we abstain. That's my understanding.
I don't know if that's true or not. Why don't we just move on? Informational reports. Quarterly review through June 30th, 2016 by Carol, our SFO.
Good evening. So here we are. We've gotten through the end of the first year of the biennium. And just kind of a preface, these numbers are preliminary. We're still completing our year-end processing. We're still accepting invoices, accounts payable invoices that may be pertaining to items that occurred prior to June 30th. And then we have some accounts to reconcile. We are getting prepared for the auditor's arrival. They will be in the offices for their field work the first week of October. And when we have those audited results, that will be shared with the board. I anticipate that either at the November or the December board meeting.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are we going to be getting a letter from the legal company? Because I'm only concerned because I got one for SWA, and if I'm out of town, I'm concerned that I wouldn't be able to answer the questions.
Different audit firms do things differently, and generally, Moss Adams does not send out that letter.
Okay.
So that's a process that Marina and Company does.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
So, in looking at our revenues for, through the first year, we came in at about 54.7% of the biennial revenue. Now, that calculation includes transfers in, and the primary thing that's transferred into the general fund is revenue from the Clackamas Regional Water Commission Activity Fund for water sales and other services that are sold. So we're about $1.2 million over what we anticipated for year one. Now, that being said, we try to do a pretty conservative budget for the revenues. Should they not come in, we still want to be able to meet our debt covenants, and we don't want to have an overly generous revenue budget that we're spending to. We would rather keep the spending a little bit lower based on that conservative budget. We also had a really warm and dry summer last summer, so our consumption last summer was a little bit higher. This summer it hasn't been so much, but we're coming into a hot week or so of weather, so we may see some increased consumption. If we look at the expenditures, we are at a little over 45% of the expenditures, again, including our transfers out, and we do move money from the general fund to the capital reserve fund. We also move money to take care of our debt services. Personnel services are at 51.4% of the biennial budget. Materials and services at 47.3%, and capital outlays at 42.4%. So, in a biennial budget, we don't necessarily say, hey, for 2 years we're going to budget $10 million for this, and we're going to spend $5 million in year one and $5 million in year two. It is predicated on specific things that we anticipate to happen. So it's not exactly split 50-50. So that's something that we look at when we're analyzing, are we bumping into any expenditure appropriations. So our revenue is coming in over budget. We should be able to meet that budget and or exceed it by next June 30th. And the expenditures currently, personnel services is about $52,000 over year one budget, and materials and services were nearly $250,000 under, and the capital outlay were at $126,000 under the first year budget. Now, especially on the capital outlay, because we tend to spend that money in bigger chunks, that could go away pretty quick. So we are watching the specific items that we put in the budget and the items that we are actually spending money on, like the hydrant truck.
Carol, so are there any transfers still to come over from the bonding? Or have we been paid back for all that work that we did up front?
That transfer has happened for all that preliminary stuff. What we will be doing now with bond proceeds, and this is primarily looking at the general fund,
Yeah.
but with those bond proceeds, as we start spending money on those capital projects for the backbone, we'll be moving money from the proceeds account to the spending account.
Good, thanks.
So, yeah,
Before you leave that slide that you had, personal services over by, what's that word, 52?
52K, so that's $52,000, yes.
$52,000
yes.
in the first year of the contract. That means we have to fire 2 or 3 people in order to stay under budget.
No, we did have some events that occurred in the first year that we don't anticipate occurring in the second year. And we also have, because of the capital projects, we are actually likely to see a lower budget in the second year because more of the labor will be charged to the capital funds. Either the capital bond fund for the backbone project or the regular CIP fund. So I'm going to get to a little bit of that here in just 1 second.
And it'll only be half of an FTE.
Pardon?
It'll only be half of an FTE.
Sound like we're spending like crazy.
So I will likely be coming to the board for a supplemental budget at some point later in the fall or early winter. And some of the reasons, we had some things that happened that weren't expected when we put this budget together. One of the things is actually, it's kind of a good thing, but it does require us to come for a supplemental budget. We anticipated selling 38 services during the 2-year period. And in year 1, we sold 75. And in fact, in the month of July, we sold 3 more. So we're up to 78 instead of 38. But, you know, that's not just money that comes in and we don't have to do anything. When somebody comes in and buys a service, we have to install a service. So that's using up some staff time where they could be doing something else. It's also using equipment, inventory items, for example, the meters themselves and other supplies that are required to install those services.
Those aren't free.
Yeah. So, and if you look at the SDC fund, the revenue in the SDC fund is nearly 300% of the biennial budget at the end of the first year. We're at like 280%. But some of those costs are borne by the general fund. So we'll be looking at that. We're also talking about the need to hire a firm to come in and to complete the water system master plan. We were going to do that in-house, but with the work that's been brought on by the backbone project, we just don't have that capacity in-house. And we need to get it done, because once that's done, we'll move on to a system development charges study to make sure that we're charging the right amount for our system development charges. And we just need to have that list of all the projects. We also have, part of the increase in the personnel services is to cover additional staffing. If you recall, when we approved this budget, when the budget was adopted, we hadn't yet had the commitment to go out for bonding for the backbone project. So knowing that we have the backbone projects, we had some need for some additional staffing. And we've also had some changes in the vehicle and equipment needs since we processed this budget. We'll talk about that. I don't think we're going to have to increase the capital outlay budget, but just during the supplemental budget, we'll talk about what we spent, what we have done in that budget, and what we might choose to delay. And we've also had the addition of the Happy Valley right-of-way usage fee. Now that brings in revenue because we pass that through to the customers, but we have to write checks for it. So again, that would be something that we would include in a supplemental budget. So back to the personnel services. Some of the pressure on the personnel services, again, the bond issuance wasn't authorized until after the biennial budget was adopted. So we didn't know necessarily the level of staffing that we would need. Once we did the biennial, or once we did the bond, then we hired an engineering manager, limited duration position to manage the CIP project, so then Adam could be freed up to manage the backbone projects. Almost all of those costs are in the CIP budget, so, but it does have a little bit of an impact on the general fund budget. We've also we brought in some temporary help in the system operations group. Those temps are able to do some of the more routine stuff, so as we're doing more potholing or anything else in preparation for some of the capital projects, our experienced staff can kind of take on that. And we also had some staffing overlaps that weren't fully budgeted for. So the lead maintenance tech, we had a long-term employee that left. We brought in somebody new to cover, and we were able to bring that new person in to kind of shadow that position for a month or so, as well as the overlap for the general manager position. And we had anticipated retirements in the first year of the budget, and probably the cost of those with the vacation and sick payouts and all that came in a little over budget. So with all of that stuff that happened in personnel services, the 52,000 is really pretty small, and with the projects moving on and significantly more dollars being charged to those capital projects, you know, we could be okay, but I'm gonna look at it for a supplemental budget anyway.
So, just so I'm clear, Adam, we'll get reimbursed for Adam out of the bond.
Right.
So we're actually ahead because we.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And, but there's things like vacation. Oh, we can't charge that to bond.
Oh, come on.
Well, not 100%.
Right, it's not 100%.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Need to understand something you said. Somebody that was costing us, experienced person's salary quit or left or retired or wherever they went. And so you brought somebody on board that costs less money, and that's the reason we're over on personal services?
What we did was we overlapped those positions. So the experienced person that was at the top of the scale left, and we brought somebody in who is not as experienced, so lower on the scale, but we had both of them working, doing the same job for a month. So,
Cross-training.
So to get some cross-training so that when stuff came up, the new guy knew what to do, where to go, what resources he had available.
Well, how come we don't put that under training budget rather than personal services?
Because it is salary. So it's still salary, he's paid through the payroll process. So one of the things that we can do is look at, when we're talking about doing the supplemental budget, and we'll talk about this further. I'm hoping that the board would be open to a work session, maybe October, is that what we were thinking about? To kind of talk about these compartments and reasons why we might need a supplemental budget. But rather than a supplemental budget, we also have the ability to transfer dollars from materials and services to the personnel services line items. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Karen.
So I've got a little bit more.
I'm sorry.
So some areas to watch in the materials and services area is the credit card processing fees. Again, our revenue was higher last summer than what we anticipated. So the credit card fees are a percentage of what people pay with those cards. So that's up a little bit. If the revenue kind of tables off a little bit because we have had a little bit cooler summer, then it might balance out. But right now it's looking a little bit high. Customer statement processing, we've done more communication with our customers. So we've had a few more flyers and inserts. We sent out the magnets, so that number's a little bit higher. We may be moving it to a different category. We're talking about where that should appropriately be classified. Should it just be printing and not customer statements? But it's still more than we anticipated spending. Our inventory usage has been higher, and that again is tied primarily to the increased service installations. So that's part of our good problem, but it is showing a higher number on the expenditure side than we anticipated. And then we've also spent a little bit more in the small tools and equipment category, primarily for some of the emergency preparedness supplies. And then water purchases. Last summer, our water purchases from South Fork Water Board got us a little bit ahead of budget. This summer, it seems like we're starting to kind of dovetail back into the 2-year number that we expected. So overall, the message is we're in good shape with the 2-year budget. Again, this is our first biennial budget. So, you know, trying to make sure that we accounted for everything and that we properly estimated. When I do talk about a supplemental budget, a portion of that is covered by increased revenue. So it's not just like, oops, we need to spend more money. We do have additional revenue that is also triggering those expenditures. And the revenue picture is looking really good. So as I said, we're about 1.2 million ahead of budget. I don't think we'll be that far over budget by the end of next June, but it does give us a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of comfort from our conservative budget. And that's all I have on the quarterly update. Just trying to keep everybody up to date on where we are, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Any other questions?
Just when do you want to do a supplemental budget?
Budget law would ask us to do that before we exceeded any appropriation categories. We are nowhere near exceeding any appropriation categories, so there's not a great deal of urgency, but I think it's appropriate to bring that to the board and to notify the community when we know that there are certain things that are likely to lead to that. So coming back next June might be too late. We're kind of far beyond that. It's like, well, didn't you already pay for that? Isn't that already covered? Even though we haven't exceeded the category yet, but the next payroll might make that happen. So I'm thinking probably end of the year, November, December.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
When we are going to hear the supplemental budget, are we going to invite the budget committee back and have them review that?
We can certainly invite them. There is no requirement for the budget committee to reconvene to do this. It's going to be a very small percentage of the biennial budget, so none of the categories are going to exceed 10%. And the budget law does not require that. Our budget committee members have been pretty involved, and we did bring them back to kind of do a touching base and seeing how we're doing. So we would certainly send specific invitations to them to come to the work session where they can express their issues or concerns.
Well, it's not really fair to them if they don't have some information ahead of time, so they can make a decision on what they think.
And we could certainly, when we contact them, we could certainly send them the packet that we will be discussing.
Did you want to make a motion? I think it's important that we keep them in the loop.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we need to do it by motion unless you want to, but
No. I just wanted to know what his preference was.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, Carol. So now we have the backbone update by Adam.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, prepared.
Well, good evening, Commissioners. Thought it would be a good opportunity, since our last update was, I think, in April, specifically going through some of the details on the backbone projects, where we are today, just as a brief overview. We're still in a preliminary sense, doing a lot of prelim design phase work, although we are transitioning rapidly into construction, especially with like the Butterfield project. As I'll share some of the details of that in the presentation. But, we'll just kind of work our way through the slides and encourage questions and discussion as we go along. We'd like to do that. So, just a quick outline of what I would like to talk about tonight. going over some of the general work that we're working on that isn't necessarily project-specific, meaning the phase 1 projects that we have the bonding money for. So those have all been kind of parsed out, well, as we spend, of course, but we have the 7 projects in the phase 1. And then general work may also include some phase 2 preliminary work. Project-specific information, they'll be talking about some of the design work we're doing, construction or construction-related work with a couple of projects. I also want to go over some of the community outreach activities we've been involved in. And I think you're all aware of some of the stuff we did back in the spring and some of the things that we've done since then. Also want to look at some of the finances, just overall, really overall look-see at the backbone spending to date. And then some of the look-ahead milestones, kind of looking down the road in the next few months at what we're going to be targeting. Just a quick review of the backbone timeline there. We know we got the bonding funds in March of this year, and then really started April through May, kind of getting a campaign of sorts out there for spreading word about the projects. We touched several agencies, including the county, the Clackamas River Basin Council, CRBC, Oregon City, the City of Oregon City, we had a meeting with them. And we also touched the local communities. Late April and early May, we had 3 community meetings at Redwood Grange, Beaver Creek, and Happy Valley Library to spread the word. We're engaged in quite a bit of research and preliminary type design work with properties, looking at kind of strategically where do properties make sense for like pump stations, for example. All of the reservoirs we own the properties for, so that's a good thing there, but we do have land use, conditional use type things that we're looking at for those. The sooner we identify what those may be from the zoning and land use perspective, then we can get moving down the road in that work. Some of our waterline alignments, we're still looking at best routes, and I'll talk about some of that in the upcoming slides. And of course, easements. As you know, we've negotiated several easements on the Butterfield job. We anticipate other easements being needed, possibly with some of the other projects that we move along. So we did retain a familiar name there, our consultant now, Lee Moore, who's working with us, continuing kind of along his path that we've been working on for the last several months with his assistance with some of the property work. He's helping us with the county, helping spread the word among homeowners. He actually talked to him today, and he was out in the heat doing some door knocking for us on some of the projects. So I think he's having fun getting out there. So great resource, of course, y'all know Lee, and he's enjoying his quasi-retirement, I think. One good item there, met our bonding requirement to spend or obligate 5% of the bond proceeds within the first 6 months of the bond funding. So that means that we had to have, I'm trying to remember the dollar figure now, but about 1.7 million, I think, 1.6 million we had to have either spent or obligated, meaning engaged in a contract. And with the general activity we've done, plus the Butterfield contract, which was awarded back in April, helped us meet that. We were actually about 8% of the required, so, or rather than 5%, we were at about 8%. So, and then just some general activity we've done on phase 2 work, and I'll again get more detail on that later on. The Butterfield project. As you know, in April, we awarded the contract to Tapany. They're looking to start work here around August 15th, next week. A little bit later than we wanted to. It was looking to be like a July-ish start date, and for various reasons that got delayed a bit, but we're still in good stead for overall schedules, goals to complete that project well within where we need to be in the phase 1 backbone work. So, as I mentioned, the 3 easements, we obtained permanent easements and 1 temporary easement from the various property owners around the project. So we're set to go. One thing that came up in the last couple of months was issue with the county. There's a zoning issue on the north half of the project that kind of forced us into a conditional use process based on the zoning out there. Not something we typically have to worry about, but because the water line was passing through some private property in the timber district zone, and there were no existing water lines in that part of the area, that automatically triggered the conditional use. Good news is the county is being very cooperative with us to get that conditional use decision made as quick as possible. They, rather than taking a 30-day timeline to review the package that we submitted to them, they got that review done in about 5 days. And then we have a land use hearing coming up in September, and they're going to do everything they can to get a quick decision out of the hearings officer. So that's something, again, that Lee is.
So Adam, are they doing a full process or a modified process?
Well, conditional use.
Yeah, but there's two processes.
So we submitted the pre-app notice, so we had to have a pre-app meeting.
So you're doing the full process?
Yes,
Okay.
and then the hearing, we're basically in the public notice period right now. And then that hearing, like I said, is September the 8th, I believe. So we're continuing to kind of knock on doors, let people know about the project, just to make it a smooth transition. The good news is that the southern half of that project is not in conditional use area, different zoning, rural, residential, and it's all essentially in county right-of-way. So we're going to start work on the southern half of the job prior to having to wait longer to lay the whole thing. So
How much timber is impacted?
well, I say that with a caveat. We have some trees on our property, on the reservoir site that we're going to be taking out, but really for all intents and purposes of the timber district as it's defined, we're not impacting. We're building a water line down a paved roadway, the private Butterfield Lane.
Perfect.
It's all paved.
That's what
all
I
the way to
thought.
the
I
reservoir
didn't
site.
know whether we deviated from that plan or not.
No.
That should expedite things pretty quickly with the conditional use.
Well, that's why I was wondering why we were going through the full process, because there's a modified process to go through.
We had the same questions
Yes.
early on.
Yes.
So we were told that this was
Okay.
the process. So that's where we are there. Again, working with property owners, just getting the word out so that we don't have any negative appeal type stuff coming out at the land use hearing, which we don't anticipate, but it just behooves us to get out and spread the word, get support. So.
Just out of curiosity, have you had any property owners that have been resistant to this at all?
No.
In any way?
No, in fact, everyone we've talked to has been supportive. The primary property owner up in this area has been more than accommodating. They're the ones who have the existing easement with on the roadway, and they granted us the temporary easement for a construction yard. And we're talking to him about some potential additional property, as you see the bottom bullet there, for the future pump station.
We aren't flagging traffic yet.
Yeah,
It's coming.
You know, once the ground gets broke, then
Yes,
all sorts of people will-
Get a hold of it.
Right, but we did send out kind of our typical notice in March for April, thereabouts. So we had early notice. Now it's kind of at the point where I'm getting a few calls saying, hey, did you guys cancel the project? You're not starting yet. You know, they understand. People are pretty understanding. There's delays, and we are going to be breaking ground quite soon. The last bullet there, just a little bit of pre-planning, but as I mentioned, we've identified a viable property for the Bradley Road Pump Station, which is a phase 2 project, but it's within the Butterfield project area. And I'll say that it's been very favorable conversations with the property owner, so we are going to go ahead and install about 500 feet of 12-inch water line and a couple valves and fittings in anticipation of a property acquisition coming through for that future pump station. So it's going to add a little bit of quantity, but the nice thing is we have bid items for 12-inch water line and fittings and valves already in the Butterfield project. So just so it's not a surprise, it'll be a quantity change of about 2% to the overall contract to the Butterfield.
But it's based on the bid prices.
Based on the bid price.
You gotta build it
The
somehow.
contractor honors their bid prices, and it's under, well under the 10 or 15% threshold, so. And from a long-term perspective, it makes a lot more sense to put the water line in now, disturb the road at one time, and not have to go back and do it again. So. This next slide, I've got one more handout for you. One of the two community flyers that we passed out, or are passing out, and I'll give you both of them. I've got one for 152nd too, which I'll touch on. Both of these are being distributed to neighboring property owners. Again, as here's the project, kind of a notice, giving people information so that they're educated and will help us through land use processes and things like that as we move down the line. So take your time to look it over. There's some good basic information on there. Had some good help from Kelly and Karen. We appreciate what they did and their artistic bent, a lot better than I could have done. So we put this out early August, and they're continuing to be distributed as we speak. So really just wanted, again, to cover the basic information about the project. What's it mean for me and my neighborhood? What are the impacts? Again, trying to cover those bases to minimize surprise. And I'm going to keep moving along if it's okay. The Springwater Road project, that's underway, pre-designed. We did some geotechnical work last week out there, basically south of Carver Bridge, down Springwater, and then turning down Hatton Road, almost to Grunland. We did 7 bores with the geotech subcontractor, and I'm waiting for their report. We know there's rock out there, but we wanted to identify it a little more so that when we start design in October, we'll do that design in-house, but when we start that, we'll have some good idea of the things we need to do. Probably be a project where we'll include a rock excavation item, which means the line's going to cost a little more to put in the ground, but we'll account for it, and we'll anticipate it. And then we've got a survey starting out there, a topo survey next week.
Is this one of those contractors that we put on the list?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
both the geotech and the surveyor are already on contract.
All on the
Yep.
list.
The 152nd project, quite a bit of work we've been involved with in the last few months on 152nd. Again, kind of preliminary design, but we're quickly moving into the design phase. Again, April to June timeline, we met with adjacent property owners, the county and the city of Happy Valley, just sharing information about the project, looking at different options for how we would attack this. As you may know, this is one that we've owned the property for years. The reservoir has been proposed twice before, and most recently back in '04, and it just didn't go forward. So we're committed now, we're moving forward. We're looking at existing property conditions, both to the south and west, looking at different access routes, looking at construction access, talking with the neighbors and looking at some options there. One option to the east, which came off 152nd Avenue, and I don't think I have it's on your flyer roughly there on the second page, but it wasn't really an ideal route as we got to looking at it a little more. It's basically a neighborhood road that goes through a mobile home park and comes off of 152nd off the hill there, which is a real doozy of a road. You can imagine construction traffic coming in and out of that. It's not the ideal. So we're looking at some other options with access to the site. And then we're also considering, again, the land use question. Right now, the 152nd property is in the county, owned by CRW, of course, but it's county's owned and jurisdiction. Several of the properties around there are in Happy Valley. We've talked to Happy Valley a little bit, and the understanding is that if we were to consider annexing our property into the city of Happy Valley, that would likely really simplify the land use process. Now, the city still has a land use process of some sort, but less complicated than county, less time consuming than county. So right now, we're really looking at options, talking with the city, talking with the county, and kind of considering, is annexation of that property, does that make sense?
So if I can chime in here
Yeah.
at this point, Adam. So this is a point that I want the board to be aware of, is the fact that we are looking at the possibility of annexing that piece of property into the city. And so if there's any concerns or anything or additional information that's needed from the board or that the board needs, please express that to me at some point in the future. But at this point, we're still in the meeting. We may submit an initial application just to kind of get our foot in the door with the process, better understand it. But I'll report back to you on kind of what we would recommend as far as the way moving forward. And then that's actually something that I can execute. But obviously I want the board to be involved or informed before I do something like that.
So if we annexed the reservoir into Happy Valley, it would still belong to CRW?
Okay,
even though
yeah,
we-
no, it's-
Oh,
It just
okay.
is a jurisdiction.
This is just,
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
And so the only question that I'd have, I mean, there's some real value in expediting the process, you know, but with Happy Valley having a new fee,
That was my question. Same question.
is there an impact that's significant or not? I mean, if it's, you weigh those two, because eventually it will be in the city. You know, eventually it's gonna be surrounded by the city, so,
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
Which fee are you referring to?
Right away, fee, I believe.
Because the work that we're doing will be on our private property, it doesn't count for right-of-way fees.
I was just concerned if we don't use that alignment and go back to a different alignment.
The alignment we're talking about is access. Our water lines do not go down city right-of-ways in that area.
Right.
They're on private property. So in this project, so there's no additional fee, it does not affect our total length of pipe that are directly related to the right-of-way fee.
Right. I'm just looking at the drawing that says proposed.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm just.
Yeah, no, I see, and I'm just saying, if we don't use proposed alignment for the pipe on private property, and we end up being stuck out 152nd, then it will increase the length of pipe in the right of way.
Yeah, the nice thing is we already have a pipe there.
Oh,
There is an 18-inch pipe that runs up to the reservoir site.
Oh, good.
That we're already paying for?
And we have an easement for that pipe.
No, it's outside the city.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's on private
It's on
property.
private
Yeah,
property.
it's outside the
Okay.
city.
Yeah.
Good. So you don't have to reconstruct that pipe, you're just gonna hook onto it?
No, we probably will build additional pipes.
Yeah.
But, yeah, one
In
of the
and
pipes
out.
is there.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just would want to know if there are any downsides to annexing into Happy Valley.
We haven't identified anything yet, but we're still at that investigative stage.
Okay.
Dialogue with the city, getting those questions answered.
Oh, sorry.
Well, we have a break. The Springwater Road transmission line, does that only go to Hatton Road, or does it go further with the possibility of some annexation in the future?
Yeah, Todd's got the map there. So as we look at, you could talk about it if you want, otherwise you'll have Dan White up there.
Where's your laser?
To the east, I'm
Where's your
assuming.
laser, man?
Right.
Get some deck.
Don't
shoot me.
Right,
Yeah,
right, it's probably not a good idea.
How's that?
Right now, from what we can see from a growth perspective, we don't anticipate something happening, but, you know, I guess the potential is always there that further east, I'm assuming you're referring to, there could be possibility of serving customers or, you know, expanding further east over time. right now that line will go from Springwater Road down Hatton, and then be the trunk line that runs all the way to Beaver Creek.
So, we're gonna go through a planning process here that Todd's working on. And I think we have to look at every possibility of where we can gain new customers. We're gonna continue to bleed customers around the cities until they're out to their growth boundaries. And so, my question is, as we build that transmission line through the Springwater Road and then the alignment up Hatton, does it make sense to get 3 sticks of pipe down Springwater Road, put a hydrant at the end of it, leave it, and then have it there for a potential rather than having to tap a hot line later?
And that may be something we look at.
I mean, tap a hot line 18 inches, not cheap.
We could certainly put a T in.
That's what I'm saying.
At
You put a
Springwater,
T in now,
have it
T
ready
and a
for
valve
future.
and a, yeah.
Yep,
And
that's not
run
a
it out to a
problem.
hydrant and call it good to go.
Mhm.
Because I can tell you the fire department look to have a hydrant right there.
Yes.
Having shuttled hundreds of tote loads of water down Springwater Road into that place. And I don't know whether you remember, we lost an engine in the river, right there, trying to suck out of the river. Yeah, we have pictures of it with the light still turning underneath the water. Yeah, I mean, we would rather have a hydrant there than have to do that.
Go ahead.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to see. I think it makes sense to set us up. It's not a lot of money.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
We are actively right now advertising for requests for qualifications for the 152nd Reservoir design component. We're looking at hiring an engineering company to head up the design of the 152nd and the Redland Reservoir, number 3. So it's kind of a 2-part scope in the RFQ. We've got really good response so far. A little bit of an overwhelming response, actually. A lot of firms are looking for work. There seems to be somewhat of a lag right now, so on the positive side, that's going to spur some good competition. People really polishing up their SOQs. The statement of qualifications are due on the 25th, and then we'll go through an evaluation process with a team of staff to make selection. So the plan is, getting ahead of myself a little bit. The plan would be to hopefully have something for the board in the way of a contract to award for that service in September. We probably won't hit, well, it's likely we won't hit the September board meeting, so, because it's an early meeting, so there may be something later potentially that we would ask to consider at a special meeting.
So Adam, are these firms, because these are all ground-mounted tanks, are there different firms that do elevated tanks? Or is it the same size?
Not necessarily. The experience can vary. The 152nd Reservoir, we're anticipating it's going to be a concrete, buried concrete reservoir. Basically, all you're going to see is the top, really similar to our Mather Reservoir. In fact, the picture in the flyer I gave you is a picture of the Mather as an example for folks to see. But that's the reason we split up the RFQ into 2 scopes. We'll be evaluating 2 separate scopes because we anticipate the buried concrete for 152nd. For the Redland Reservoir, we anticipate a welded steel, which would match the other 2 that are there. So we may get one firm that has both capabilities in-house. We could end up recommending awarding to 2 separate firms, depending on how the proposals come in. That is the qualification-based selection process. So we look at the statement of qualifications only, no price is on there. And then once we select a firm based on quals alone, we negotiate the scope.
So the 3rd phase that takes it out to Beaver Creek with an elevated tank, is this the same set, or is that phase 2?
That'd be phase 2, so that's not inclusive in this RFQ.
I just have had people ask me what that's gonna look like. I mean, we told them what we're doing out there. And I guess guess my thought was, the sooner we know kind of what that looks like, the sooner some of us can start selling it, because you're gonna have to go through a relatively lengthy process out there, because those people are gonna wanna know.
Right. Lastly, we've got a survey starting around the 152nd area, also starting next week with one of our other surveying firms. Just a couple of quick design facts on the 152nd reservoir. We are designing for an 8 million gallon capacity. 5 million gallons essentially adds redundancy to CRW's north side storage. It would allow us to do it's essentially a redundant source for the north side, make the reservoir. We'd be able to get in there, take that tank down, do more active maintenance and inspection on that older tank, and then over time, of course, vice versa. It also, of course, is giving us a storage requirement for the backbone south across the bridge. And then there's consideration for additional storage at 3 million gallons for future CRW needs and sunrise demands that are capacity that are allowed under the 190 agreement that was signed into. So
when does this time frame, when does it Sunrise make a decision about whether they're in or out?
That's a great question that another area I want to highlight with the board. Everything that has been in all the information has talked about 8 million gallons, and so that's what we've advertised. But we wanted to really stress the points that this assumes that there's going to be some demands from Sunrise in order to justify that 8 million gallons. And so the question is kind of what is the board's expectation, because we haven't really landed on what's the best way as far as talking about Sunrise is as far as participation up front, participation in buying capacity later, incorporated as part of the rates. All of these are discussions that we probably need to have sooner than later in order so that we know what it is that we're going to design, and then we also need that background and information from Sunrise too as far as what their desire and need is. So we are trying to coordinate with them as it relates to this initial step as far as reviewing proposals and finding an engineering firm, and then unfortunately, it's one of those things with CRWSC. It talks about a planning document, it talks about a capital improvement plan. Those were never done, and so we're trying to get moving forward on those so that we have some numbers that support whatever the decision. So timing is a challenge. So to be fair.
Yeah, I expressed earlier before you came that I don't want to build a reservoir there and then sometime in the future have Sunrise say, well, we need some of that water, and then we don't have enough water to go to the south side. That has to be well worked out.
So has there been any conversation with Sunrise about how they would prefer to pay for that capacity?
No specifics that I'm aware of, although Wade and I are supposed to meet next Tuesday to talk some more.
I think it would be helpful if they have a preference on how they'd like that structured.
Well, and then we're also trying to figure it out as it relates to our bonding as well. So there may be some advantage for us to consider some arrangements that's a little bit unique, so that we can preserve our ability to use our bonding.
Last time I was at SWA, or maybe it was the time before, they definitely indicated interest in participation. I don't think they made a final decision at this point. They were definitely interested in participating. And then the question would be, how do they pay for their participation, which would have to be negotiated. My preference is simply that whether it's done up front or if it's done on a delayed basis because of their own financial picture, that we have an actual written guarantee that they are participating, so that there's no question about it. Because if we're building this based on the potential for their use as well as purchasing of water, then we ought to have it in writing. Because then it frees up some of the funds that go into that tank for other parts of the project.
So, just going off of what Metro's telling us, they better start planning. I mean,
400,000 more people.
Yeah, holy cow, I mean, and I guess it's a good place to throw this in. All of this stuff needs to get planned, you know, in light of a lawsuit with the Oregon Water Watch. We are at 747 as of an hour ago on the river for flow.
We'll talk more about that.
And there's lots of people still looking at taking water out of this river. And I think the sooner the group that's here now has a plan on what we can do, the better it's gonna be for all of us. We can build all these pipes and do all of this stuff, but if the river can't supply us, we're in trouble, you know? But we realized last year that having more storage at this time of the year is a good thing, because it gives us the ability to vary our pumping times and do those kind of things to keep our system, you know, running. But if they're talking about the number of people, you know, on the north side being the number that they're saying, that you know, Clackamas has got to absorb the next, what, 400,000 people? Well, we got to talk about what's waters in the river, because we got a problem. If this kind of summer flow, I mean, looking at your graph, we're setting new low averages. You know, our averages now are dropping. You know, if you look at what averages have been over the last 30 years, we're every year in the last 3 years, we're below those. And so if that's the trend, then there needs to be a conversation. That's why I'm anxious to see where we are with this planning thing. And then that needs to go out to all the other, you know, people that are in the basin about, okay, what are we gonna do? Because eventually, water resources are gonna come back to us, and there's gonna be a little come to Jesus time there, you know, and we're all gonna have to figure that out. And I think the sooner we start those conversations, the better. You know, and this is a good spot. I mean, deciding what you're gonna do with that extra 3 million gallons is a big deal. I mean, is the kind of stuff we should talk about.
Moving on to the next slide, just an example of the other flyer that we did for 152nd, similar format to the Butterfield one. A little bit more into there with respect to schedule, or just a different format really. But, kind of did a brief profile view there of the reservoir on the second sheet, gives people an idea of what elevation-wise it might look like. And again, those are being distributed. Redland Reservoir project. It's again the next one, kind of on the tail of Butterfield and 152nd Reservoir. So because it's somewhat linked to the Butterfield project, we've already accomplished a few things out there. We included our property there where the 2 reservoirs sit, the 1 acre site, in the Butterfield project survey. Obviously, we're bringing the Butterfield line into that site, which is the bold line there, on top of right there. That's the one we're going to build. We're going to connect it to the 2 existing reservoirs. And then this is just a rough outline of the new reservoir, which should be about 1.25 million gallons. We are going to put in, on the Butterfield line, there will be a couple valves and T's to set us up for the tank pipe. We just did some geotech work out there. We did essentially the 4 corners of the proposed site for the reservoir. And waiting for the geotech report out there. It sounded like generally it was pretty favorable conditions. They went down to about 35, 40 feet with their drilling, and didn't find anything that caused any undue alarm. So the nice thing about that is we'll have some data in hand, both for this site and the 152nd site where there's been past geotech done out there, to hand off to the consultant for their design, and they will make the determination if that's adequate or not. It will be initially kind of a supplement to their design, and then, but the intent of the drilling on Redland was that we would have, again, the four corners of the reservoir site pretty well established with good geotech data.
So do they look at the need to increase the strength of the soil underneath that tank?
They could, yeah. Yeah, it's a full analysis based on what they find.
I've been reading a lot for Washington County about the reservoirs and the fact that there wasn't any extensive work done when they placed reservoirs. You know, they take off the land of the tank, right? It's what we used to do it, right? So everything we're reading is that the subsidence problem is a real problem. And you never know until you have a problem. You have a problem.
Right.
So that's why they're recommending you make sure that you look at, you know, whether you need to strengthen that soil before you build the tank. And it's, you can't do it later. You got to do it now.
No,
So,
now's the time. Moving on, Highway 224, Intertie at Rock Springs. Just a little bit of prelim work we've done there. Waiting to hear back from ODOT on a little more information on their future plans for the Sunrise Corridor. We have some data from 2010 when they issued their kind of a conceptual plan, moving past the phase one that ended up ending at 122nd, further out, including
that was
Rock
the
Springs
EIS,
area.
wasn't it?
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah. And in that, they had some alternative layouts of diamond interchanges, half diamond interchanges at Rock Springs Junction. And our goal is to get the best available information from ODOT now so we can start designing the alignment of our water line where it will be least impacted by any future ODOT work. If we had it in, like, say, private easements, as opposed to in the roadway, then the cost to possibly relocate that during ODOT's project would be borne by ODOT.
So are you going to hang that on the bridge?
We already have a crossing of the Rock Creek Bridge.
Oh, you do?
That's where our, yeah, we have an 24 inch that crosses that.
Oh, you do?
Mhm.
That was done when they widened the bridge.
That one was done, Bob? I wasn't around at the time, but
The one west looked at
Yeah,
the
but-
extension
Right, when West did their, right,
in the early 90s.
yeah, 93.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There was
Yeah,
a
it was-
3 conduit pipe going across the Rock Creek. One was for sewer, one was for telecommunications power or something.
Right.
One was for water.
Oh, good.
I believe there was some cost sharing.
Yeah, Bill Garrity was the one that did that
Yeah.
project for the county.
Patton Road, we talked a little bit about. We're again looking at property options, basically at the Grunland, Patton Road area for potential pump station property. We're considering alignment options for the water line going down Hatton. The picture there is out of the EMMS, Don will have to tell me what that stands for, Emergency Management Data System.
Hazard map.
We overlaid that data with our GIS, and so we kind of have a good idea of how things lay out today. It's kind of hard to see there, so I apologize, and the slides that you have are not much better. But part of our analysis, Hatton Road sits right there, kind of in the middle of the sheet. And then these red lines are known fault areas, and then the yellowish or light green areas are past slide deposits.
Ancient slides.
Right, so the top of the slide or the scarp was up there where the red lines are. And then just kind of shows the fan out of the deposit of the slide. So stuff like that we're looking at, among other things, to consider. You know, we may end up doing geotech work in certain areas just to see what those soils are like, looking at things like liquefaction risk and all that. Other considerations would include land use. You know, if we stay within county right-of-way, roadway, that gives us an advantage to possibly avoiding land use issues. But you know, we may have a better route in private property if we can get easements. Looking at areas where possibly we could pick up additional customers, as you mentioned. There are some places around here where there's a lot of homes on wells that someday, it might be nice to have a main running near them that you could connect to fairly easily. So.
Is there any way to mitigate that by going higher on the scarp?
No.
I don't know, that's one of the ways that they do that, and then they're just mitigating it in place where it's
Yeah.
designed.
For this area, it wouldn't be very feasible to run a water line that far
Out of-
west,
yeah.
out of the alignment of Patton, go way over here and then cut down. There's properties there, the terrain, you can't really see it, but if you know that area, I mean, this is a pretty steep hill.
Yeah,
here.
just straight up there.
Right.
Yep.
So. And a lot of different things. Phase 2 projects, again, these are all, of course, non-funded. Well, they're not, we don't have a second round bonding yet, but we're doing that under just some general backbone work. Looking at a few areas around Beaver Lake for property for the future pump station. Bradley Road, as I mentioned, we've already identified a viable property within the Butterfield project area, including that 12-inch line. And continuing to talk to the owner about that property. And then really, that about does it for the phase 2 projects, other than the very basic property, water line alignment down Brazel Road, further down towards Beaver Lake and up to Beaver Creek. Just a quick financial update. As I mentioned, we met the requirement to spend 5% within the first 6 months, obligated to spend it. There's some numbers there, the bond amount, 23 million. Project expenditures, stuff we actually spent through June was about 280,000, just shy. And then we added the Butterfield construction contract, that puts us over 2 million for spent or obligated. And that's where we did well. Almost 9% of the total bond is either spent or obligated to date. Just a quick chart, and we're playing with layout a little bit, so my goal is to, as we move forward, maybe each quarter or we'll see as data, we're going to obviously be spending more money as we move along. Construction's going to start eating up those dollars pretty quickly, so this is going to look quite a bit different over time. But just to give you an idea, the first 2 or 3 quarters of backbone eligible spending, including late 2015, we spent about 70,000 in that quarter of 2015, and then through June spent about 200,000 roughly. If you look at the 2 bars to the right, it's kind of a 2-part chart. So this yellow line is you need to read the axis over here to see the cumulative. So we're, again, about 60,000 to 70,000, and then creeping up to about 280 currently. So. And again, playing with layout on that, it's confusing, and you can always change that. Just to give you an idea. So some milestones, and then we'll be done with this presentation. September, again, we're looking at getting you some information from the RFQ for the reservoir design contract, and hopefully bringing contract award to the board for consideration, probably late September. October, we'll be starting the design for the Springwater Road project, and again, that'll be in-house design for about 1,700 feet of 18-inch height. And it's likely that the reservoir projects will start kicking off October ish in November, depending on how soon we can get an engineering group under contract. December, we should be done with the Butterfield construction. Springwater design will be wrapping up, and we'll be moving into about a 30% design with the 152nd reservoir, and start putting together a land use package for, well, county or city. Depends on where that ends up. And then January, we'll be looking at the Springwater project hitting the streets, and getting that bid out so we can build that in the spring.
And we're hoping to have the water across the bridge like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Probably not.
Yep.
Come on, think positive.
That's all I've got, so thank you for that.
So I have one question. So the current 12-inch line we have going up from Beaver Lake up the hill, that's already there, right?
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. There was one question about putting new line up. I think the line's already there, right? So I don't think you have to touch that at all. So,
Yep.
Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
The water now comes down from Morgan City and we'll be going the other way.
yeah. We'll be pushing it up the hill. But that was fun.
Okay, so we are up to the management report.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, Commissioners, and thank you for your attention. We have a lot to share as it relates to financials and the backbone project. And I wanted to highlight a couple additional items that are included in your report that's included in your board packet under agenda item 4, plus there's some additional items I want to touch on that aren't in that have come out since this report was developed. First off, as it relates to intergovernmental relations, I kind of want to take this by levels. So I want to talk about the state approach, I want to talk about regional approach, and I want to talk about a basin approach. And so just to make you aware of on the state level, we actually have one of our staff, Suzanne DiLorenzo, who is part of actually two of the drought task force, and also the integrated water resources strategy policy advisory group. So we're well represented on some statewide committees that are responsible for looking at obviously items that are very important to the district as it relates to drought management, also managing our water resources. Those are both processes that are in the early stages, so there isn't a whole lot to report at this point. They're still kind of learning how to work together and with the different opinions and so on. So kind of bringing it down to the regional level, I just want to highlight some activities at the Regional Water Providers Consortium. One thing noted in your agenda report is the fact that Metro will be actually withdrawing or no longer participating in the Regional Water Providers Consortium effective July 1st of 2017. So they're finishing up this budget cycle. That will have some sort of a small impact on the budget looking forward. Still don't know a lot of details as far as what motivated that decision. So as we learn, we'll point that out. One thing that's not in the packet, but I do want you to be aware of, is the fact that as part of the Regional Water Regional Water Providers Consortium, they do a Regional Water Supply Plan update. That plan has been updated. It's now available for public comment. And so they're receiving comments on that plan until August 26th. And then the Regional Water Providers Consortium Board, which Commissioner Humberston sits on behalf of CRW, will consider that update for approval. I think the thing to note, the last update was in 2004, and so really what this update looks at is just what's changed since that 2004 report. If anybody's interested, the plan's available at conserveh2o.org. And you can also submit comments that way, I believe, as well. Kind of bringing it back down to kind of more of our local or basin level, I want to highlight some things as it relates to Clackamas River water providers. One, we had an opportunity at the last meeting to have some very good information exchange with the vector control district, which initially, we were kind of wondering why we're talking to them, but it's important that they communicate with the water providers, given the fact that they're using pesticides in the basin as it relates to mosquito control. So learned more about mosquitoes than I probably wanted to, but I did gain a lot of confidence in the new district director who's still in that position. He brings a wealth of experience and a real passion and a lot of research background as it relates to the challenges with that. The second thing in your packet, I just want to note, you do have a flyer about an emergency bottle distribution process for emergency water. And so customers who are part of the Clackamas River water providers could actually ask for four of these 3-gallon bottles. There's a process to sign up online. There is a first come, first serve. So once they're gone, they're gone. And then actually we're looking at doing a distribution process. So it'll be something that will be like a weekend or two that will be bottles, and we're looking at possibly hosting that here at Riverside Park, and thought this might be a good opportunity to kind of work together with others in the region to maybe use ICS planning in order to move forward with this event. So
Do we
something
know
for
when that
folks to
event
be
will
aware.
be?
When it will be?
Yes.
Still working on the details.
Okay.
So
Those are 10-gallon bottles
they're
or?
3-gallon
Yeah, so
bottles.
those
Three?
plastic.
Three.
So they're the plastic things. Just as an exercise, get one of these and see if you can do it in a day. All your water needs, do it.
Great idea.
You can't do it.
That's a great idea.
It'll blow your mind how fast you go through 3 gallons of water. It's kind of like telling people to be prepared for 72 hours. This is a joke.
You're probably right.
You gotta flush the toilet somehow, folks. You gotta drink it, you gotta wash your dishes, you gotta clean your face, and that's it. Try it. We've done it at our house. That's why we have 1,500 gallons of other water that we just drink this. We don't use it for anything else. That's just drinking. All the other water comes in. So try it sometime. Get one of those 3-gallon buckets and take it home and say, this is it. Starting at 7 o'clock this morning until tomorrow at 7 o'clock, this is it. And it is tough to keep it under 3 gallons. So it's just a kind of a fun exercise you can do. And if you have kids, it really drives you nuts because they can't understand why they can't have more. You know, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A couple of calendar items for you to be aware of that we'll make sure are included on future calendars if it's not already is one, there's going to be the annual Clackamas Watershed Tour that's going to be on Saturday, October 1st. It's sponsored by the Clackamas River Water Providers. And then the annual, 14th annual actually, down the river cleanup process where they clean trash and stuff from the Clackamas River Water. A great event that's sponsored primarily by the Clackamas River Basin Council. One other thing, just speaking of calendars, is that the CRWP is also going to be providing copies of their kids calendar. It features artwork from kids, from students within the district and so on. So when those become available for distribution, we'll put some out front in our office for folks to pick up. And if you're interested, let me know and I'll be happy to get you one as well. Just real quick reminder, shifting to the Clackamas Regional Water Supply Commission, that the meeting for this quarter has been canceled, and so the next meeting will be held on October 10th. And that should be included, you should have with you a printed calendar that has many of these dates. Wanted to also point out, we've talked to the board in the past about the water treatment plant intake repair projects that Joe has been project manager of. That project, the field work is all complete, and so we're waiting for the final reports. The good news is it went quickly, went smoothly. I can say that, Joe, right?
No cost overruns?
Nope, actually below budget. And you have some additional details in your packet. And so kind of a fun project to watch some of the photos and the progress. And I don't think anybody tried to jump off the crane or anything, so. As far as we know. Let's see, one thing as it relates to staff development, we talked about the backbone project, and we had an extensive report on that and part of the additional needs. We're going to have some additional needs for some inspection needs as it relates to the project in addition to what we do at the district, and so we're actually have initiated an inspector training program, so we're trying to grow some staff from within the organization. The nice thing is we have 5 employees that have shown interest in looking at that as a possible career path, and so we'll keep working through that process. Yes, sir.
I have a question about that. If they get that specialized training, would we be able to loan them out to other agencies in charge for their services?
I hadn't really thought.
I don't think we have the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're kind of developing them for our needs.
Okay.
And
Just sort of curious.
there's liability with that. You want to keep them here. Looking at our stuff.
Yeah,
Keep them under
okay.
our umbrella. So would you be thinking about using LDs to backfill those folks?
We haven't really.
You can't pull, based on what you're saying, I agree. We can't keep pulling people out out of the crew, right? And if we don't backfill with something, and I guess my preference would be is to look at limited duration folks until we see going forward. One of the problems the county got into was they went and hired a whole bunch of folks when they did the Sunrise, did the Sunnybrook interchange and all that stuff. Now they got a problem. They got way more people in that engineering side than they need because they're not building anything. And it caused a lot of problems. And so, you know, managing that influx during this project is one thing, but, you know, it's not that you can't hire those LDs permanent as vacancies come up. I mean, I think that's a good way to test people out.
Yeah, we actually, as part of this process, will probably have a retirement
Yeah.
at some point in that
Yeah,
piece that I think
exactly.
will probably address that issue. So
It just was one of those things that we did at the state that worked pretty well. We had a lot of projects, and it was gonna be 2 or 3 years. We hired people knowing full well that their term was either 2 or 3 years, and that at the end of that time, they would either have to reapply, or they could transfer, you know, apply and transfer to permanent jobs if they wanted to. But it gave us an opportunity to take a look at those folks and see what their skill set was and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is actually a fairly extensive process. It's gonna last over 2 years as far as the training process.
Yeah.
With the idea that you have an inspector at the end of it, and so, I think the way we're approaching it kind of gives us that opportunity to kind of look at a little bit of succession planning as part of that as well, so. It's always good to point out when you've done something well, and so I want to make sure that we're recognizing the hard work of our finance folks and Carol's crew. We've recently, once again, earned the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting by the Government Finance Officers Association. The plaque's on the wall. I was going to hold it up, but we already posted the plaque with this year's button. You know, it is one of those things that you may hear about how we get it various times, but I think it really is important to stress the fact that this is looked at by an independent group that is very critical of the application process. It's very involved, and it's really a significant kind of feather in the cap in making sure that we're presenting information that's very user-friendly to the public, to the board, and really as a great opportunity for our financial information to be communicated in a useful process. So a lot of that doesn't just happen. It's the support of the board, it's support of staff, but I really want to recognize Carol and her staff for their work on that, because it is a significant achievement that is something we should be proud of. Another thing we want to be proud of is the fact that we have proposed implementing a paperless billing option for our customers, and that is proving to be popular. So we hit the milestone where we wanted to get at least 200 signed up for that program to kind of self-sustain itself or start to receive some cost savings. And we've received that in just 2 billing cycles, and that's something that we would anticipate will continue to grow as we move forward. Some training opportunities for the board, just to make you aware. One of the things we wanted to be sure is there is an SDAO training. I think Commissioner Kalani is signed up for that. If there's any interest, please contact Karen. And then last board meeting or board work session, we talked a lot about incident command system training, the value of having board members participate in that. And so in your packet, on attachment A3 is a memo that provides some information about how to register and sign up for at least the IS 100 and IS 700 courses. Just kind of looking ahead for the August work session, I've noted a few items that we'll have on the agenda. One additional item that we'll probably need to add to the agenda is Evergreen Development IGA with Oregon City. So a lot of items to cover during the August work session. Just remind you that that's August 22nd at 6 p.m. Although not in your packet, there are a couple items that I did want to highlight in addition to the report here. One, obviously it's summer. We're getting ready for a warm spell here, it sounds like, in the next week or two. And so obviously with that is increased water use. And one of the challenges as a water provider, especially on the Clackamas River, is kind of balancing that water use with the fact that that's typically a time when the river flows are a little bit more challenging. And so one of the things that we've encouraged customers to do that can help out is just to use water wisely. And so we'll be trying to be more active with that messaging to make sure that people kind of understand some opportunities that they have to conserve water, also some opportunities and kind of relate that to the impacts to the river. One way that customers can help is by implementing different water conservation tips, especially outdoor watering, and we've included a number of tips on our website. There's been information included with the bills, and we'll continue to provide more information as the summer progresses. But one of the things, and Commissioner McNeil alluded to this, is one of the things that we need to watch closely and be aware of is the river flows, because that obviously dictates our summer supply. So one of the things, we'll talk more about this at the August work session, but at least I wanted to give you kind of a primer as far as the visual that we're trying to get so that the board has information to work together. This is information that we gleaned from the USGS, but the idea is we want to try to give you some historical perspective, so compare what we're at today versus where we were last year, which reminder that last year was a very challenging year. Kind of where some flow targets are as it relates to our water management and conservation plan, and then also give you kind of a range of what we expect or what has been graphed as far as water ranges in those percentiles. So again, we'll go over this information in more detail at the August work session. But at least wanted to give you a primer as it relates to the information tonight. With that concludes my manager's report.
Any questions? Okay, Commissioner reports and business. I don't think that we need to do anything about that. So if there isn't any, yes, go ahead.
One item with Commissioner business, work session in November. I would like to request that we not have that one. I will be out of town.
So
I understand you would be too. So either we'd have to have it in a completely different date or cancel it.
no.
So we can
Let's discuss that.
see on the agenda.
Yeah,
Moving it is always an option, yeah.
yeah. We could wait until, see whether we even need a work session when the time comes. Okay, if that is it, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.